This is, obviously my first annual dinner in Scotland. It really is an honour taking on the role of president of the CBI at such a politically and economically vital time for the UK. And I think many of the decisions we'll make in the next 2 years will be incredibly important to our medium and long-term economic prosperity and to the employment of youth and to the creation of wealth across the country and across the Union. And I'm very determined that the CBI should continue to speak out with a rational, evidence-based and clear perspective on important issues for the United Kingdom. In the run-up to the general election in 2015, as the clamour of political debate increases, the CBI will continue to offer the apolitical and factual voice of business. Now, it's been an oddly busy summer recess, and while the media has been dealing with incredibly important matters such as Jeremy Paxman's beard, there has been other things going on too. The royal birth, sabre rattling over Gibraltar, the Archbishop of Canterbury going up against moneylenders, Edward Snowden's Russian asylum, David Miranda's detention, not to mention the serious and extremely troubling developments in Syria. On the more positive side, at domestic level, we had a Brit win the Tour de France and we had Andrew Murray win Wimbledon. So we had an interesting and great summer in that respect. So I would like to offer a few comments about our views on the current state of the economy. It grew by a now revised 0.7% over the last quarter and was a broad-based expansion, simply improved to a greater extent than anyone had expected, and it suggests a real injection of momentum aligned with increased business and consumer confidence, driving a return to growth through this year and into the next. As a result, we at the CBI have revised up our GDP growth forecast for this year from 1% to 1.2% and from 2% to 2.3% for 2014. The forward guidance on interest rates issued last month by the Bank of England under the new stewardship of Mark Carney gives us more clarity on this. It is a canny move, in my view, to link unemployment and inflation levels. It gives the MPC more scope to keep policy loose while supply-side certainties are resolved and carefully monitored and watched. On top of this, the summer saw quite a slew of additional forecast-beating data. Our latest CBI surveys show a broad rise in business optimism across services, manufacturing, finance, and distribution. And the statistics tend to really corroborate this. Activity in the UK's services sector, which is so important to us, grew last month at a faster pace than any other major economy. The latest Scottish Industrial Survey shows increasing optimism among manufacturers for the first time in a year, boosted by resilient export orders and better output levels. UK-wide manufacturing and construction sector survey data also show impressive results. Clearly, all of this is good news, but we must be careful not to get carried away. Outside the UK, global economic momentum has yet to lift. We need a pickup in Europe. Even though the Eurozone has now tentatively pulled out of its persistent recession, only Germany is likely to have growth with any steady underlying strength, so things will remain slow. Our trade deficit has improved, but there's no doubt that we need to be exporting more around the world than we currently are. Over the last decade and a half, world trade has increased at a faster rate than our trade flow, so our share of global exports has actually fallen to just 3.4%, almost half of what it was in 1980. We are not as geared up as Germany and with her Mittelstand model, so we need to be more skillful, more helpful in supporting the bedrock of SMEs in our supply chains and in their search for export markets. Back at home, despite the much more positive general picture, underlying conditions remain subdued, and we have to be very observant. It is a fact that we're in the slowest recovery on record. Unemployment rates, particularly youth, are still high, living costs are rising, and our overall productivity is 15% lower than its pre-crisis trend. So you won't be surprised to hear that most of our conversations with the UK government are about ways to stimulate productive growth. Fiscal discipline and efforts to reduce the deficit have to be the right approach. But I'm also clear that what spending power the UK government has must be used on capital projects that are most likely to deliver growth. Critically, we need to focus our attention not only at where growth is going to come from tomorrow, but also in 5, 10, 20 years' time. At the core of this is the perennial problem, our ability to raise level of workforce skills so businesses have the talent they need to succeed. Our chronic skill shortage remains a tough nut to crack. Businesses need to work hard to tackle the perception, for instance, that as here in Scotland, hires followed by a 3 or 4 year degree course is the only route to a good career. It is not. When I was chairman of the Commission for Employment and Skills, we did work in 2007 that indicated 38% of graduates were in non-graduate employment. We had too many graduates, not enough apprentices. Students, however, are becoming savvier and shopping around for courses that deliver clearer paths to employment. Businesses are telling me that some of their best people are now coming through apprenticeship schemes. And in an increasingly competitive employment market, basic skills, experience, and attitude are crucial to meeting the demands of the workplace. I'm convinced that we're going to see much more interest in the already growing demand for learn while you earn schemes. Universities, businesses, and government must be more innovative, take advantage of this change of approach, and work together to expand high-quality alternative routes. Much talked about industrial strategy is another critical area for more effective collaborative working. It is critical because down the line it relies on us ensuring that now we're the world leader in those sectors that can deliver that sustained growth. And we must work to strengthen and support the supply chains that underpin those champion sectors of our economy, capturing as much value as we can along the way. Many of our companies are showing the ability to compete and to win in global export markets. Take here the Scotch whisky industry, where 93% of its export products are exported. I mentioned earlier that our trade deficit is narrowing, which is good, but the UK and Scottish governments need to get behind talented businesses to help them break into new markets. The size of the prize for exporting our way to growth is substantial. Achieving our export potential could be worth up to 1.5% of UK GDP, or an injection of 20 billion to the economy by 2020. With the EU-US free trade deal negotiations starting, it is even more critical to think big and broad about our place in the global economy. If we could pull off this EU-US trade deal, it would make a significant difference. The two largest economic blocs in the world, with roughly the same set of values and approach to life, with approaches to social justice that could not compete with some of the areas of the Far East. It could add 3-4 percentage points to GDP if we could get this right. And the urgency is there because of youth unemployment and because of the issues we collectively face. That also means getting our own house in order to allow UK firms to compete internationally for the best deal. A smoother visa system, a robust IP protection system, and greater clarity on the UK's aviation policy. I hear very often that Scottish businessmen as well are concerned that access to Heathrow and Gatwick is still critical. Tied to this, the idea of building growth from beyond our shores is the role we play in the European Union. It is one of the most important and most challenging decisions the country is facing. I take the view that we are better off in a reformed EU, and the CBI is setting out its evidence-based vision at our annual conference in November. It is important because the single market, I'm sure I do not need to remind you, is crucial. It has a net positive impact on UK GDP and employment in the 20 years since its creation. The EU is far from perfect, but we want to see reforms focusing on improving competitiveness and boosting trade. It's harder to do this when you're not round the table and actively and constructively involved in the discussions. Europe's somewhat erratic economic situation over the last few years may change the balance of the debate, but we have to avoid a scenario where those countries in the Eurozone wishing to integrate further marginalize countries like the UK, which are outside the single currency. This would not be to the benefit of the Eurozone or to the UK. Fundamentally, it's hard to see a positive economic scenario in which the UK will be better off out of the European Union. In a week that has seen another handful of media stories on Scottish independence, the latest report from the Treasury and Vince Cable's appearance at the Scottish Affairs Committee on the referendum, and I'd like to turn from talking about unity abroad to talking about unity at home. Up front, I'd like to say, as Sheena said, that this is unequivocally an issue for the Scottish people to decide. Where I think the CBI has an interest is the outcome will matter hugely to businesses and consumers across the whole of the UK. As president of the CBI, I want to engage constructively, apolitically, and factually in the debate. The importance of this issue cannot be underestimated, and we need to have our eyes wide open. It's obvious that there are a great many benefits gained by our common British membership, how Scotland benefits from the UK as much as how the UK benefits from Scotland. Together, the UK enjoys security, shared risk, and common values in a very uncertain world. The economic implications of independence published by the Treasury earlier this year raised difficult questions around post-independent costs, like maintaining different cross-border tax, regulatory, legal systems, and different or shared currencies, for example. I believe that breaking our successful single economic and regulatory framework could have serious and expensive consequences for business and consumers. As Sheena said, the team here in Scotland has asked more than 200 questions to the Scottish Government. Many remain unanswered, or the answers currently offered remain underdeveloped. This, of course, leaves us with many more reservations around independence than it assures us of any advantages. We want to know how our shared conventions and institutions could successfully survive a new economic and political order, how we continue to operate as efficiently across a fractured domestic single market or operate as efficiently as a joint springboard into the EU single market, and what the effects would be on our unified labour market, our integrated infrastructure, or our catalogue of well-honed business arrangements. I think the onus, as Sheena said, is now on the Scottish Government to respond, and we're all looking forward to the autumn publication of the Independence White Paper. The breakup of the UK would bring with it potential dislocation of our economy, and there are many, many economic reasons to keep the UK together and for the shared benefits of our single market. In other words, the CBI is not convinced by the economic case for independence. To repeat, however, the decision on Scotland's future is ultimately one for its electorate. It is, however, I believe, as Sheena said, absolutely fundamentally important that the CBI and business can apolitically, unemotionally, and factually lay out for the Scottish people the issues and the risks about independence, as well as the advantages of independence to the extent that they exist. They must have the opportunity to make their decision based on the reality of the facts and the implications it might have on business, economy, and jobs. Industry has a critical role to play. And John Criddle and I are steadfast in working closely with Sheena until she steps down in October, and with John Howe, who takes over from her, and with Director Ian McKinnon to ensure that the needs of business and the wider economy continue to be reflected in the debate as the road to 2014 gets very short. So there's a lot to be done locally, nationally, internationally, and I've only highlighted a handful of our priorities. I'm very much happy to be here this evening. I very much hope that we will be able to together work in the interests of the economy of the United Kingdom and of Scotland and make the right decisions in the coming months. Thank you very much indeed.